Dean Chandler, and many other aliases, is the creator of Sonichu. He has high-functioning autism and is self-described virgin with rage. Now, obviously, this man doesn't dress too sharp. I mean, seriously, who would dress like that? That's ridiculous. Now, there's a few more things about this guy. He's a pretty homophobic guy. He's had this thing with gay people. He believes, he's so, very, I'm so straight that he believes that pickles remind him of, so he's like, I won't eat those, which comes into play later on. I'm bringing this up for a reason. He's very homophobic. He's got a lot of very bigoted opinions, which are pretty not good. He is, right now, currently 45 or something, but at this time, for this picture, he was maybe 20 or so. And for the longest time, he was looking for a girlfriend, or as he called it, a boyfriend-free girl, which is sort of a weird kind of saying, doesn't count lesbians, but whatever. So he wants this boyfriend-free girl, and for a guy that looks like him, obviously you would think that maybe he doesn't have a whole lot of standards, but he does. Chris also is of the firm belief that Axe body spray is a substitute for a shower, which I don't think anyone outside of middle school believes, but just to make sure, it's not. Anyway, he's got some egotism issues, violent outbursts. He pepper sprayed a GameStop employee.
Oh, goodness.
That was pretty bad, over the color of Sonic the Hedgehog's arms. But let's talk about that more. The love quest. So, Chris didn't believe in approaching a woman directly. His idea was to put up a sign with what he wants. And this sign here is the prime example. This sign shows that he's 21 and single, white male, looking for a cute 18, 21-year-old, single, female, boyfriend-free girl. And you can't see it on here because the text is kind of small, but there is a lot of stipulations on this. You had to be 18 to 21 years old, but he raised that when he got older, so, But whatever, that's fair. Can't smoke or drink. All right, that's fair, I guess. Can't have autism. I don't think that's fair. All right, okay, sure. Has to have a job in order to support both of them, but he didn't have a job. And no darkies. That was another one. He was like, you have to be white, which is pretty bad. Now, he had this sign, and he would bring it to malls, gas stations, even his college. And the dean of his college, Mary Lee Walsh is her name, she was like, hey, stop doing that, or you'll be banned. And he was like, well, you just don't like love. You're against me finding true and honest love. So let's continue on. This is Megan Schroeder. She was a friend of his. They met at a card shop. And he really thought that there was something here. As you can tell by this picture, it wasn't reciprocated. He had a tendency to put people in his life into his comic that he made, which I'm going to be talking about more later. But Megan was an unfortunate victim of that. She was put into the comic alongside the dean of his college, Mary Lee Walsh, who was put in as a villain for Chris to beat. This comic was sort of an outlet for him to vent out his frustrations at the real world and to sort of a power fantasy. Megan was a friend of his, but she would constantly be like, please stop touching me, you're making me uncomfortable, and it was pretty no good. Right, so where this falls, according to the Autism Society, some of the most common traits for someone who has high-functioning autism in regards to romance are a lack of understanding for boundaries or when to say and do certain things. Like, he had this tendency to tell women, he just met that, like, oh, you shouldn't, not think about the chance of us getting together, because it could happen when he would know them for maybe a day or so, when most people would know that's something you bring up a lot later on. A lack of understanding for unspoken social rules. I mean, that one goes without saying. Obviously, that's a check. A lack of understanding for what flirting is. And this is a thing I've heard around from a lot of people who have high-functioning autism, is just that it's kind of hard to understand. Because even some of the people who have it a little bit less severe, they're just, why not say what you mean? But taking things as unshaken facts. He had this belief that every time on the third date, no matter what, that was when you had sex. And obviously it doesn't go like that. It can be the first date, it can be never, but no matter what, he was like, anytime he had a fake girlfriend or a girlfriend, which I'll get into later, he would be like, oh, I can't wait for the third date. And they'd be like, what's the third date? And he'd be like, oh, you don't know? It's the third date. So he had also an aversion from this is an aversion from directly approaching people to begin conversations, which is widespread, but obviously that's very evident here with the sign. Now, there was some causes to this. This isn't, because of how well documented this man is by the internet, I mean seriously, there's more written about this guy than there is all 4 presidents of Mount Rushmore. It's absolutely insane. By people who are called Christorians, which is, I myself am a bit of a Christorian. I don't like to mess with the guy, but I like to observe and document. But his parents never put him in the special education he absolutely needed. When he was a child and diagnosed with high-functioning autism, his parents were very old-fashioned, and I think that they had the ideal that a lot of people have now, which is, or a lot of people had back then, and still some people have now, which is, if I put him in there, they'll put him in a straitjacket. They'll think he's crazy. And they thought if they just put him in the quote-unquote normal classes, he'll be considered a normal kid. That autism's one of those things where if you just ignore it, it goes away. And I don't think I need to explain, once again, how bad that is, but that's a bad idea. If any of you have kids that are diagnosed with high-functioning autism, you need to get them treated early on. You can't make it go away, but you can mitigate some of the effects, and it's just really bad. His parents instilled a lot of very bad ideals with him. And his mother was very bigoted towards homosexuals. His dad had a lot of race issues. Just in general, they gave him a lot of bad beliefs, which sort of shaped who he is because he was very dependent on his parents. They were pretty much the only people that didn't kick him out of their lives. He had an incident when he was young with a babysitter locking him inside his room, which caused him to not speak for an entire year. Now, this can be incredibly traumatic. What happened was that she was on her phone and he was bugging her, so she locked him in his room. It was only for about an hour or so, but that kind of thing can be seriously traumatic at a young age. He didn't speak for an entire year because of it. He would just grunt and yell. And then in high school, his father paid people to hang out with him, which seems like a nice thing to do, but in a time where you really should be learning what is not okay, people who are paid to tolerate you is probably not going to teach you what's not okay. Okay, I had another slide here. I don't know what happened with that, but that's cool. Sonichu. All right. So we go back from all this depressing topic to this weird bootleg-looking thing. Sonichu is the brainchild of Christian Weston Chandler. There he is. For a college project, they had to make an album cover, and they couldn't use any copyrighted characters. So Chris Chan said, let me just combine 2 copyrighted characters, and that'll make it mine. Namely, Sonic the Hedgehog and Pikachu. Sonichu was a comic series that was posted on the internet that used to be about Sonichu, but about 5 issues in, it just became about him beating up people that were wrong to him in the real world. Some of the villains were jerk-ups, which are just mall police that told him to stop loitering, Mary Lee Walsh, and all sorts of things. In this comic, Megan, this girl who was very repulsed by him, was fawning over him. Women loved him. It's a power fantasy. And once people started finding this, it got bad. The beginning. I know, we've gone for a while, and this is just the beginning. But in 2004, at the Charlottesville, Virginia Fashion Square Center, Chris was doing one of his rounds. He was walking around hoping to find a boyfriend-free girl. He had started handing out business cards with his website on it. And unfortunately, the person that the business card fell into the hands of was not a boyfriend-free girl. This led the way to the Encyclopedia Dramatica. You might not know what Encyclopedia Dramatica is, but it's essentially Wikipedia, but awful. Encyclopedia Dramatica has pretty much any famous person with a terrible, terrible tint to them. It's nothing but the bad things about them, nothing but negative opinions, and a page was formed about Chris. Once people online caught wind of his website and his laughably bad art, I mean seriously, it looks like a child drew it, and who he was, because he had a tendency to provide personal information. So once people found out about this guy and found out that he was real, they lashed out at him hard. An article was written with some really, really bad stuff. And Chris thought that they were just uninformed. So in a bizarre turn of events, he thought his plan would be to make a information overload, where he would put more information on here, like his tendency to soil himself and his political beliefs, because he thought that that would overload the bad information and counteract it. Obviously, this did not work, but there was another thing that they liked to do. Because Chris was so anti-gay, one way to get a rise out of him, which was what a lot of people on the internet like to do, to see funny reactions, was to draw his characters doing gay stuff. He didn't like this, but he thought that they were just misinformed once again. So he ended up drawing his own Rule 34, not safe for work art of his characters. And that didn't go well. One of the drawings that he did was of himself and his friend Megan Schroeder. And once she found out, she cut all ties with him. Understandably so, that's pretty creepy. So let's talk about the sweethearts. The sweethearts are Chris's term for a boyfriend-free girl. When he's in a relationship, that's his sweetheart. These are all different women that have claimed to be his girlfriend at times. Usually they're just fake people through the internet. Sometimes they're dudes, sometimes they're actual girls, but they're just, some have had more malicious intents, like just blackmailing him, bullying him to see how much abuse he'll take for the promise of love, which is a lot. But some of them tried to do good things. They'd be like, hey, Chris, next time I see you, I'll give you a kiss if you clean your room. And sometimes he would do it, most of the time he wouldn't, because he was pretty lazy. Now here's our villains. We've got a couple here. The soccer commentator Jimmy Hill, Surf Shack Tito from Rocket Power, Billy Mays. Don't ask, I don't have time to explain that one. Mary Lee Walsh, the dean of his college, the CEO of Nintendo, Shigeru Miyamoto, the man in the pickle suit. I'm going to go ahead and explain that one because that one's one of my favorites. Basically, like I said, he doesn't like pickles because it reminds him of gay stuff. So, these guys thought it'd be really funny to have a girl come up to him and be like, hey, do you want to go on a date? And he was like, yes, I found a boyfriend-free girl, I'm in love now. And while they were on this date, this man in the pickle suit strolls up and he's like, hey girl, come with me. And she leaves him for this man in a pickle suit. And he makes a video where he's like, the pickle man tricked me again. And it's my favorite thing. So that's the pickle man. He shows up a few other times, but it's just general debauchery. Clyde Cash, which is just, if you Google Guido on Google Images, he's like the fourth result. And Liquid Chris. Okay, so this is around the time that Chris sort of is like, okay, I don't want to, because the internet's being pretty bad to him, pretty ruthless. And he decides to come up with an idea. He makes a channel called IBA Chandler, obviously. And he makes this video trying to claim that this whole thing was just a big ruse. He never had autism. He was just pranking everybody. And some people fell for it, but most didn't. So from that, Liquid Chris was born. People tried to pretend that they were being fooled by the IBA thing and thought that the IBA stood for Ian Brandon Anderson and that this Christian was a fake Christian. And Liquid Chris came into the scene. Liquid Chris is some guy who was a really good actor who could pretend to be Chris and copy all of his mannerisms and basically just make fun of him. And everybody on the internet pretended to be fooled by this. And Chris didn't like that. So Chris would constantly be like, you're not the real Christian, I'm the real Christian. I was just lying about being a troll. I'm the real Christian. And they had this back and forth. And honestly, the guy was so good at doing his like kind of nasally voice. It was incredible. But he was like, okay, well then we'll have a singing competition. And they had a singing competition and Liquid Chris won. Liquid Chris beat Chris at just about everything because he was just better at most things. He had a girlfriend, and Chris thought he could fool Liquid Chris's girlfriend by pretending to be him. It was a very complicated back and forth, but basically a lot of these villains, these quote-unquote villains, were just people playing characters. They knew what they were doing, but Chris didn't. He believed that this guy genuinely thought that he was the real Christian and that he was going to have to fight this guy in order to save, his world and all of his fans that he had. But to be honest, he had very little genuine fans. The following that he had was almost entirely people who were ready to point and laugh. So the fall. So after some time, Liquid Chris kind of faded into obscurity. Most of these trolls did. They would do their thing. Sometimes they'd hack his accounts and they'd, ask for him to do weird videos, blackmailing him. It was pretty bad stuff. But he eventually talked to one of his priests at his church and came to the conclusion that maybe the internet's not his friend. And he went offline for a long time, and people were kind of disappointed because for the longest time he was just a punching bag. He was someone to laugh at. And personally, I think, I can't speak for everyone, but I think we've all sometimes been there where we, especially when in elementary school or middle school, we saw a kid who was special needs, and maybe instead of being the friend that we should have, we kind of just laughed. Especially, when you're that young and you're like, oh, you don't know that there's any difference. You just think, that's the weird kid. Let's laugh at the weird kid. And this isn't the only person on the internet with autism that became a laughing stock because of it. Sammy Classic Sonic fan, there's a bunch of other ones. People that were just passionate about things that they liked that got ridiculed by everyone. And it's a really sad story. Some people say he deserved it. He said a lot of bad things to a lot of people, racist, homophobic, sexist things, but it's hard to say. I'm not going to sit here and judge him myself. So where are our key players now? Well, Chris Chan, or should I say Christine Chandler, has now been transitioning and now goes by female pronouns. I've been using male pronouns mostly just because being a straight man and being, a dude is a big part of the story back then, but she now goes by Christine and is still mostly the same. She doesn't work. Obviously, she's not going to be able to get a job with how much has been documented. Very recently, she pepper sprayed a GameStop employee. There's a few other things. It's mostly just her complaining about My Little Pony on Twitter and begging for more seasons of My Little Pony. Not a whole lot. She's kind of running like a mini cult about like cartoon characters coming to the real world with some kind of dimensional merge. Borderline, there's a lot of stuff stewing around there. Honestly, a lot of people could totally see, because she's claimed to have seen her characters in real life interacting with her, and it's kind of hard to tell what's playing a character and what's being real, because she's been around so many people playing characters, it's hard to imagine that the lines aren't a little bit blurred for her. And what about the other guy? Liquid Chris. Well, Liquid Chris, this man who was just killing it. He was personally, to me, one of the better Chris villains because he wasn't malicious. He was just kind of a mirror that sort of was allowed him to see himself and maybe notice some of the errors of his ways, but he didn't. So Liquid Chris is, he was in a band for a little bit with his brother. He did some music. He now works as a cancer researcher. Dude's doing really good for himself. He's one of the few people that came out of this thing better than when he entered it. Aside from that, the point I'm trying to make here is that, yes, sometimes we notice people, with strange interests, with weird interests that are sort of weird, and you kind of want to laugh. I mean, I think we've all seen someone, maybe not because of mental illness, but just someone weird, and you're like, what is this dude? And sometimes that can be really bad for the person. I don't know if Chris Chan would be the way that he is currently if it weren't for the internet, but it's hard to say. It's definitely had its ups and its downs, but I mean, now it's how he makes all of his money through donations and stuff. He's kind of accumulated this cult-like following of people who are just fascinated, myself included. I skimmed through so much. The last 20 years of this man's life are documented in painstaking detail. There's a 25-part documentary series on YouTube. Each part's about 30 minutes long, documenting this man's life from beginning to now, and it's currently still making episodes since there's so much here. I really had to skim over so much because this is such a fascinating tale. But I think for right now, there was a few communities that were built over this. The Kiwi Farms, originally the CWC Key, which is like Christian Weston Chandler, because that's what he would call himself, Quick. So they were the Quickie Farms, but now they're just the Kiwi Farms. The Quickie is the encyclopedia exclusively for anything pertaining to this man. Most people are like, I want a Wikipedia page about myself. This man has an entire Wikipedia site dedicated to him. I mean, that's pretty impressive. So these communities that were formed around just observing this fascinating specimen, there's a lot of bonds that were made through this. So that's it. I'm Kaelan Carnes. I've spent too much time on the internet. This is what I have to show for it. Thank you very much.
Woohoo! That was good.
Thank you.